This made the mafia really powerful. They ruled the heroin trade in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they were using opium that was grown in the Middle East, and later they hooked up with opium grown in Indochina. But this Middle Eastern opium would be refined in Lebanon and Corsica, and then it would be shipped to the United States. It became what was known as the French Connection. Right? After the French got beat by the Viet Cong in Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the United States decided to retain influence there, which is a kind of a euphemism for taking over the French's empire as well. We had taken Britain's empire after World War II. The French wanted to keep theirs in order to stay in NATO. They kept it for a while. They weren't able to keep it. They got run out of Southeast Asia. They got run out of Algeria. And so we step in and we inherit this relationship with all of these Chinese triads. They were historical drug-running gangs out of China that have been going for thousands of years. Except that in 1949, China went communist. There was a war, civil war, and the communists won. The nationalists were exiled, and they went first into Southeast Asia and then to Taiwan. They were known as the nationalists, the Shanghai Shakers, or their official name was the KMT. I'm not even going to try to pronounce what it actually sounds like because it's a really, really long name. But the KMT was the nationalist army. And they took over the opium trade because the communist Chinese, Mao Zedong and all of them, got rid of all the drug dealing. They felt that it was an instrument of decadence for the West and that it was a way to undermine society, so they eliminated it. And so the nationalists picked it up. They moved the poppy fields down into Burma and into Laos and Thailand, creating what is now known as the Golden Triangle. Right? So as a policy to contain communist China, we start supporting the KMT. And the KMT then partners up with the Sicilian and Corsican Mafia to get a worldwide opium heroin trading network going on. So all the dope hit in the West Coast and all the dope hit in the East Coast all came from the Mafia. Hard to document this, but the Mafia and the United States kind of fell out during the Kennedys. The Mafia helped the Kennedys get into office, and then they ended up helping kill John F. Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy tried to get them shut down. So this is about the time when you're starting to see the Mafia lose influence, right? But I'll get back to that part later. In the 50s through the 70s, the CIA began allying themselves with guerrilla armies in Southeast Asia, particularly the Hmong and Laos. The Hmong trafficked a great deal of opium and ended up shipping most of it out on contract airlines that the CIA controlled, euphemistically known as Air America. This heroin was flown into Vietnam. It was dispersed amongst soldiers. At one point in time, one third of all the in-country soldiers in Southeast Asia were hooked on this really cheap, high-grade heroin. Right? So in the late 70s then, oh by the way, there were also all of these ghetto riots going on in the late 60s, and then suddenly all of this really pure heroin starts finding its way into all of these urban centers during the late 60s and early 70s too. A lot of this was coming over, most of it was coming over on military transport planes. It was both being directly flown by the CIA, it was also, there were a lot of enterprising soldiers that did everything from stored in caskets and dead bodies to, you know, just paying people to carry it in their personal couriers. Military air system doesn't have to go through customs, it doesn't have to register, it doesn't get checked to this day. So it's always been a major avenue of trafficking. Or I hate these sirens. I'm gonna wait just a second. Okay, in the late 70s then, now following this pattern of arming, funding, training, and overseeing these guerrilla armies, the CIA gets in bed with a bunch of ragtag Muslim fighters from across Central Asia and builds them into what's known as the Mujahideen Army. This happens after the Soviets invade Afghanistan. The Mujahideen included such notables as Osama bin Laden and his number 2, Ayman al-Zawahiri. And they also involved the Afghan opium lord, a man named Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. Right? This guy pretty much cornered the opium market through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This group, this Mujahideen, of course, evolved into the Al-Qaeda network. We created them, we trained them, we showed them how to fund themselves, we showed them how to operate. And they either, had a very serious grievance with their former employer, or they are up to the same type of games that Gladio was up to, which is to create an act and then blame it on your enemy in order to advance further policy. Nobody really knows these days. In the 80s, in what came down to be one of the worst constitutional crises in our history, the CIA, under the supervision of then Vice President George Bush and his office, created, armed, funded, financed, trained, came to be known as the Contra Army. They were a group of right-wing soldiers, mostly mercenaries, that were put together to fight the Sandinistas, who were the army of the democratically elected government of Nicaragua. We didn't want them there. Reagan thought that it was a bulkhead for communism, and Congress didn't want to fund any of this mucking around in Central America. So what they did was they funneled money and weapons to the Congress by selling arms, which they admitted, and by selling cocaine, which they didn't. How did they do this? Well, it started with what they did in Vietnam, what they did with the mafia, all of this history, but it also then had to follow a kind of legal pattern. So in February of 1982, the director of the CIA signed a memorandum of understanding with the White House, Department of Justice, the cops, the federal cops who look at everybody else. This agreement said essentially that the CIA did not have to report or otherwise record any drug trafficking activities that they noticed amongst any non-employee. So the word non-employee means asset, it means contract employee, it means anybody that wasn't an actual agent of the CIA, which is everybody that they work with. And that's how the intelligence community operates. They pull in assets and they pay them or ply them in one way or the other to do their bidding. So this meant this freed up everybody, the pilots of contract airlines, the Contra trainers, their funders, government people, anybody who was involved in the direct trade of the CIA simply just didn't have to record it. So whenever there was an investigation, it wasn't that there wasn't any evidence, it's that there wasn't any legal requirement to record the evidence. Thus, the CIA was able to just simply say, we didn't see anything. We don't know what you're talking about. This conflicted with a number of investigations the DEA had going into major drug trafficking. Now, how did this happen? How did the CIA get to tell the DEA to step off or to distract them? This began during the Nixon administration when Nixon put the CIA in control of the DEA and how it mounts drug investigations. They did this because Nixon wanted to open up China to diplomatic relations and didn't want the DEA going in and poking around all of these drug trafficking networks in China that we have been involved with for years and years, right? So what that basically made is that the CIA had to directly report to the President and the National Security Council about drug trafficking, and that's kind of the way it's been since. So why all this interest in Central and South America? Well, in 1983, Occidental Petroleum discovered a 1 billion barrel oil field known as Cano Limon in Colombia.